Hello, we're doing something a little bit different today. So this week I turned 49 and I've been feeling incredibly nostalgic. I just want you to close your eyes for a second, well, not if you're driving, but come back with me to 1992. So I'm 15 and I'm waiting at a bus stop. I'm on time, but there's always that fear. What if the bus came early? There's just no way to know. I've told my friend I'll meet her at Tower Park at 7 o'clock and I'm wearing my new River Island white ruffled blouse, a black skirt, black tights and a velvet jacket that I got from a charity shop. My foundation is slightly too pale and I'm wearing Cherry Vamp lipstick. My Walkman is playing Madonna's Deeper and Deeper on repeat. And we're going to try, I think we do go to the cinema, but later on, I think the main goal is to try and get into Colonnades to see if we can spot our crushes. That's where everyone underage goes to drink. But we don't get in, and I won't get in, not at least until I'm 16. And you know what? This is the 90s, and God, I miss it. And what really made me want to do this episode is I was watching on Instagram a clip of a man, I don't know if he was in his late 40s, early 50s, and he heard those first few notes of Born Slippy and he just sort of stopped in his tracks and he was wiping away a tear from his eye and there was just thousands of comments underneath, just really missing the 90s and saying that we peaked in the 90s. So I was thinking about this and thinking, did we really peak in the 90s? Was this the last time that we really lived? So what I've done is I've gone through lots of different places, looking at the comments to try and compile the top 7 things that we most miss from the 90s. And I'm going to be doing a countdown from 7 to 1, top of the pop style. And later on, Sarah's going to be joining us to talk about the power of nostalgia and why it hits us so hard. So let's go straight to the comments. So number 7, it's magazines and problem pages. I mean, magazines were everything to me. They were my Bible. I knew exactly which day they came out and I go straight up to John Menzies, the local newsagents, after school. And sometimes I would just stand there like browsing, not sure. There was magazines I would definitely buy and there was the ones I wasn't sure about. And the newsagent would say the same thing every time to me. This isn't a library, you know. And then I would be shamed into buying it. For me, these magazines, they just really took me away to another world of like films, music, culture, fashion, beauty. And it was just all so exciting. But I don't know, for you at home, do you remember there was this whole progression with magazines? Someone said in the comments, everyone had a rite of passage during puberty where they graduated onto the magazines for slightly older kids. And then this comment, one of the best parts was reading them with friends, waiting till everyone was finished till you could turn the page, swapping around different issues during lunch break. I remember sitting on the bus at the back of the bus, and I'd be with my friends. We'd just be there like going, well, can we turn the page now to the next one? And they always had like cringe confessions and you had to sort of score these stories of teenage humiliation out of 10. So I just thought I'd read you one that I found on Reddit. At the local roller disco, I was finally skating near the boy I fancied from year 10. I tried to do a cute little spin, but went flying straight into the DJ booth. The DJ stopped the music and announced, "Can someone help this girl up?" And the entire place stared. I wanted to disappear. I think I did things like that all the time growing up. But here's the thing that I still think about today, and we used to whisper about and share around the bus and at school, was this, you know, More magazine used to have the position of the fortnight. And someone said in the comments, I loved Jackie and the problem pages when I was about 10 and then giggling over position of the fortnight with my 14-year-old mates. I mean, when you think about it, we were like, well, now I'm older, I see it. Like we were children reading sex advice, pretending that we understood it, pretending we weren't terrified of something called the helicopter position. But then there was the language, and I remember this so distinctly. I found this comment that said we had words like snog and lush or even fit. And what about boif or preggers? I mean, we definitely got them from Just 17. But then there was that sort of watershed moment when you graduate to sort of like what I call the cool magazines, like The Face or Sky Magazine or insert whatever you were reading. I know some of our listeners, they wrote to us and said they were getting Melody Maker and NME. What I loved about Sky Magazine is they'd always have like a sort of up-and-coming star, big cover story, whether it's Juliette Lewis, Winona Ryder, Patricia Arquette, you name it. But one of the things I really loved, I still remember her as Dear Karen, and she described herself as the Sharon Stone of agony aunts. And her tagline was, "Tell Karen, tell the world," which, I mean, was pretty daunting. And like, can I just say, it's so interesting looking and dissecting the advice she gives to people in the 90s. And I'll put a link to her columns because she's actually uploaded them onto her website, and they're a bloody brilliant read. So what happened to all these teenage magazines? So someone asked on Mumsnet, where did they all go? And everyone replied, the internet, obviously. And then someone else added, same happened with Lads Mags, which should not be missed. But these 90s magazines, they were one of the few things that I actually kept. And I laid them all out, and there was hundreds of them. I was just looking at the timeline from 1990 really to 96. God, I can remember what I wanted to become and what I wanted to do with my life. It's almost like I could see my tastes evolving in real time, and almost proof that my teenage years existed and what I was into. And I guess that's why they're so important to me. Which brings me to number 6 on what we most miss from the 90s, and that's the fashion and beauty. I mean, this is a huge one. I think all of you know the 90s has been having a revival for quite a few years now. And someone on Reddit said, I went clothes shopping for my kids today and I'm walking around the girls section. I'm like, holy 90s fashion, Batman. It felt so surreal. And then someone replied, I saw a girl in a Nirvana shirt at my work. I was listening to the Unplugged album and I said, oh, we're listening to Nirvana now, are we? And she goes, what? Who? She literally pulled I don't know her about Nirvana. I almost died of old age. And then this, I do volunteer work with teens. One walked in one night all excited and told me that Nirvana is getting back together. And my mum said she'd buy me tickets. So, I mean, if that was happening, that would be incredible. Okay, so we can definitely say the 90s are back. Except it feels strangely like we're not the primary target audience. And I do love this comment. My jeans are now all wide leg and boot cut, the way nature intended. The world is healing. And then this, I saw parachute trousers in the shopping centre. Parachute trousers. And talk about it smells like teen spirit. Do you remember when you would get on like the bus on a Saturday night going out and there would be just this chemical trail of smells like Calvin Klein's Eternity or Lynx Africa? I mean, it was just like, wow. Impulse body sprays, that was a huge thing. Temptation, Free Spirit, Hint of Musk, which is the one I wore. And one person wrote, one spritz, real or imagined, can take us straight back to school discos, bus rides to the city and sleepovers. And another said, Impulse brought back its iconic O2 body spray and the smell almost made me cry. And I do think there's something about smell that is so powerful. I think a big part of that for me was the Body Shop. When I was researching this episode, I sent this to my best friend Claire. I said, God, remember these, like the kiwi fruit lip balm, you know? And she said to me, she reminded me, do you remember Dewberry White Musk? And then I remembered the cucumber cleansing milk and those weird white squidgy bath pearls. And someone said in the comments, they made the bath slippery and treacherous and the plastic kind of would get stuck in the plug. But let's talk about the fashion. I mean, I tried out a lot of different styles. See how many of these you actually tried yourself. So yes, we had the grunge. There was the floral dresses, the long floral skirts and the big black boots. And then there was the soft gothic look. I had black hair, the velvet dresses with chokers. And then my clubbing era, the cute little dresses, platforms, glitter, or as my friend called it, slut dust. Towards the end of the decade, then that's when I was in the combats and the crop tops thinking I looked like All Saints. I say my biggest style icon. There were so many, like I mentioned Winona Ryder a lot. But actually it was Drew Barrymore. And someone said in the comments, 90s Drew is the epitome of the era. I still want to look like her 30 years later. I mean, if you've seen her in Poison Ivy, you know what I'm talking about. And someone said about this look, they said, I've never changed from the ultimate true grungy vamp. Grungy vamp, I love that term. And I actually think that's what I've been going for all my life. And I asked many of you listening at home what you most missed in terms of fashion and beauty. You said you missed the MAC Vamp nail polish and lipstick, the Rimmel black cherry lipstick, the choker necklaces, everything having moon and stars or yin yang symbols on it, smelling vaguely of patchouli incense sticks. That took me right back to those kind of enigma, alternative healing shops in the 90s. I absolutely loved them. And I used to go and buy, well, I remember buying a mood ring and I never actually knew how they worked and what they meant on the chart. I love this comment. My mood ring always went black when I saw my crush or when I did double science. Hard to tell the difference. And I love that idea that we were all looking at each other's hands to know what mood we were in the 90s. But let's talk about the downsides of 90s fashion and beauty, because, and I think it's hard to sort of gloss over, I've said before, like when I did the fat shaming episode, I was only a size 10 and 12, but I thought I was so fat. I used to try and wear Levi's 501s. I could never get them to fit properly. If they fit on the thighs, they would be a huge gap at the back. They were too big on the waist. It was just like I was this really weird body shape. So thank you when we got a bit bigger, when J-Lo came along and Destiny's Child. But it was a nightmare. There was even the obsession with being really thin, like Kate Moss thin, or super fit like my idol Madonna, or even like Cindy Crawford. Do you remember the Cindy Crawford workout videos? But anyway, I used to tie a cardigan. It was permanently tied around my waist because I thought it would hide my big bum. And someone wrote in the comments, I was a fat little girl in the 90s, and thanks to heroin chic and flat stomachs as accessories, I never got to wear the cute, stylish clothes other girls did. Now I'm a fat grown-up woman. The sizing is much more inclusive and the styles are coming back, so I get to wear all the clothes I loved and dreamed of wearing as a girl. I'm happy as Larry. Despite the tiny clothes and tiny bodies, I do feel like there was something very freeing about the fashion. As someone said on Mumsnet, the key difference from today, you could experiment without permanent photographic evidence. Fashion mistakes stayed in the memory, not online forever. And I think what I most love about the 90s is that it felt really feminine and sexy, yet tough at the same time. I just love that look. So look, at number 7, we had magazines, and at number 6, we had fashion and beauty. So we're coming down to number 5. Let's talk about 90s music. If you hear Teen Spirit, Ride on Time, Buffalo Stance, even I Will Always Love You, do you just get this sensation with 90s music? And I just love this comment under a post of someone reminiscing over the track Baby D's Let Me Be Your Fantasy. I remember hearing this and rushing down the corridor that leads to the main dance floor. What a feeling I will never forget. Absolute banger. And someone said, it actually pains my soul when these old school classics come on. I wish we could go back. And that's it, right? I often think these were the peak moments of my life, dancing with my friends in the clubs, from cheesy nights out to proper big clubs, just the pure freedom. But I did wonder, what makes 90s music so special? And actually someone asked this on Reddit and there was these responses. The UK was firing on all cylinders and consistently producing some of the best music the world has ever heard across all imaginable genres. The musicality, the orchestration, the production was on another level. And another person said, there was actual music scenes. I wish we had scenes like that today. And this is what strikes me the most, is that it was the variety. If you ever owned a Now That's What I Call Music compilation, you'd have everything on one CD, from The Prodigy to Mariah Carey. And then I like this comment, someone called Enigma sexy church music. And someone said this, I'm nearly 50 and everything just sounds the same now. In the 90s, every band had its own sound. You could tell a track within 2 seconds. I miss that. And I really get that. Let's talk about Top of the Pops. I've actually been watching old episodes of it on YouTube, and I just forgotten how important it was to us culturally. As this person says, the show's success was in its simplicity. You watched it religiously every Thursday, the chart rundown, the dry ice, the expectation, the odd act you slog through just to glimpse someone you loved performing. And this brings me to MTV, which feels so synonymous with the 90s, which, to be honest, in the early 90s, it was really hard to watch. I could only really get it at my local gym. And I felt like they had the same videos on rotation. It was Four Non Blondes, What's Up, Soul Asylum's Runaway Train, and those Aerosmith videos with Alicia Silverstone and then Liv Tyler. And if you've seen them, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, go and have a look on YouTube. Okay, they look slightly problematic to me now, but at the time, oh my God, they were so fucking cool. And of course, Madonna, she was everything to me in the 90s. There was Blonde Ambition, Erotica. There was the incredible music videos. She really did teach me about sex in these formative years. I was 13 in 1990. I found Justify My Love a little bit scary. I was always like, what is going on in those hotel rooms? I don't quite get it. Do you remember the video was actually banned and you could buy it, which I didn't do. I didn't have a video player back then. No matter what you think of her, she was so far ahead. And now Justify My Love, you could almost argue that as an average kind of Sabrina Carpenter video. Let's talk about the Spice Girls. They were absolutely a breath of fresh air. There's no denying that. And I love the music. There's a good documentary about girl bands in the 90s called Girl Bands Forever. And Melanie Black from the All Saints, she actually gives some really good insights about how they were slogging away for years before the Spice Girls and their whole journey. So it's a really good first-hand kind of account. But there's no denying, like I said, that the Spice Girls were an absolute juggernaut. But there was this feeling, wasn't there, that the culture was moving forward. It was full of possibilities, which leads me to that brief spell that we had of cool Britannia optimism, which felt strangely cheerful for us Gen Xers. I mean, there was this window in the 90s where Britain just felt optimistic, like genuinely optimistic. And in 1997, Vanity Fair declared, London swings again. I remember seeing that cover in the local newsagent with Patsy Kensit and Liam Gallagher lying in that Union Jack bed. And I did think, God, the UK is so cool right now. It didn't feel just like hype, it felt real. And someone on Reddit said, I was a teenager into my 20s, and I must say, with no social media, improving living standards, the place felt optimistic. It did feel like an incredible time to be young. So what was actually going on? So Tony Blair's new Labour swept in. There was the Good Friday Agreement, minimum wage, Britpop going global, Spice Girls representing British girl power worldwide. I mean, it felt like it was all moving forward, like the future was going to actually be better. And one person said, the 90s were my golden years. Life was good, music was brilliant, the economy was stable, the future seemed exciting. Then another responded, I bought my first flat at 23 on a normal admin job. The 90s were the last time that work actually paid. And I just want to say that again. A flat at 23 on a normal salary. And someone said, now it feels like everything is about fear and culture wars. In the 90s, we felt like we were heading somewhere better. Then someone responded, now there are large organised groups actively trying to push things backwards. I do think it's interesting that this Oasis comeback has created this massive outpouring of nostalgia for that era. You know, when, no matter what you think of lad culture or Oasis, I feel for me it represents an optimism. When it was about mates and music and feeling like you belong to something, you know, the country felt positive and cool. I just want to read you this comment. Oasis are more than just a band to people. They're a cultural identity and a reminder of the great times growing up in the 90s UK. Their whole persona embodies the cool Britannia era where the economy and culture were booming. Maybe it's just rose-tinted glasses, but pair that with the sing-along football chant melodies and you get something very special and emotive for so many people. And I also remember really singing Wonderwall with my friends down the pub. So that brings us to number 3. Shared cultural moments. So when I was 19, I actually got a verbal warning at work for always being late. I was meant to start at 9 a.m. At my defence, I can't stop watching The Big Breakfast. I'm not joking. Anyway, I wasn't alone. Someone said, I used to struggle to leave work on time because of The Big Breakfast. And someone else said, there were so many guests who'd obviously come straight from a night out rather than attempt to get up early in the morning. Just couldn't happen now, sadly. And I think someone summed it up really well. They said Channel 4 was full of chaotic, colourful programmes in the 90s. TV is so beige now. But you had to watch the shows when they were on, especially if you wanted to talk about them the next day with your friends. You know, on weeknights after school, I would run home and watch Home and Away and then Neighbours. And then Friday nights were brilliant too, weren't they? I used to love Pat Sharp's Funhouse. Saturday morning TV, I mean, just too many shows to mention. And some of my favourite shows were, do you remember Johnny Vaughan used to have a film show? Used to love watching that. And then also French and Saunders, so brilliant, so funny. And of course, there was the American TV. I was obsessed with Party of Five, My So-Called Life. I basically wanted to be American. And then there was the cinema, from Pretty Woman to Thelma and Louise, Basic Instinct, and Sleeping with the Enemy. I mean, going to Tower Park UCI was the highlight of my week. I used to go with my really close friend, and sometimes, do you remember when you wanted to see a film? I remember being 13 and trying to see Pretty Woman and trying to look 15. I mean, I did get in, but there was always those heart palpitations, like with everything, like when you're trying to get alcohol for the first time, trying to look older or getting your national insurance card. It's hilarious when I look back at it. And I'm not the only one who lived for the weekends. Someone said, it's crazy. There's an entire generation that will never understand how magical Friday nights were in the 90s. Which brings me to the video store or Blockbuster or whatever your local video store was. But I'd always be walking around for ages with my friend, or probably my gran or my mum or my sister, negotiating which videos to get, because, you know, I'd always have to get Annie out, which I love the film Annie, but, you know, I'm like 13 or 14. I don't want to watch Annie again. And it always felt like those two films, like Can't Buy Me Love and Lawnmower Man, you know, those kind of films. And the film you wanted was not there. And if it was in stock, you'd absolutely be thrilled. And someone put it perfectly. The fact that we never got it all the time made the experience that much richer. Kids now are just saturated with whatever they want, whenever they want. And one of our listeners said this: TV shows where Buffy were unique, so a lot of us could bond over it. Now we're oversaturated with shows on a gazillion channels. Back then, 1 episode a week. Oh, the anticipation and excitement. And that's the thing, wasn't it? It was 1 episode, then you'd wait 7 days, talk about it, theorise what was going to happen next, and you'd wait. And one of our listeners, she did make me laugh because she said the one thing that she didn't miss was that creepy little girl screensaver that came on when nothing was being broadcast. Do you remember, with the chalkboard and the wooden doll? And it is mad when you think about it that we did used to have TV that would just shut down. But here's the thing. Back then, we couldn't just text our friends, did you watch it? What do you think? We had to actually call them on the landline. And this was the non-negotiable. You had to call after 6 o'clock because the calls were cheaper. Which brings me to number 2, and we're getting really close now to number 1. At number 2, what we most missed from the 90s, it's landlines, letters, and life before constant contact. So someone on Mumsnet said this: the freedom of your parents not being able to get hold of you while you're out and about with your friends. You know, that freedom, I think, for people was everything. And this was one of the biggest themes that I saw in the comments. It wasn't described as isolation. It was more like it was liberation. Let's start with phones. You usually had one in the house. Maybe you were lucky and had one upstairs as well. Usually in the hallway where everyone could hear your conversations. So I used to wait till 6 and then call my friend's house. And half the time their mum or their dad would answer. And you'd have to make that awkward small talk before, you know, asking if your friend was home. I used to absolutely dread when those monthly itemised bills would come through and there'd be these various interrogations. Like, who called this 0898 number for 10 minutes? Yeah, it was me. I did call to see if your crush likes you, one of those hotlines on the back of a magazine. But being unplugged meant if you made a plan on a call, you had to keep to it. If you said, look, meet me outside River Island at 2 p.m. on Saturday, or meet me by the clock, or meet me by the fountain, you had to keep to it because you couldn't just update them. There was just no way. And if you couldn't find them, you just had to wait and wait. Or you eventually went home and then would call them and find out what happened. And someone said in the comments, making arrangements and having to stick to them as there was no way to let someone know you're running late. Commitment actually meant something. And a lot of our listeners said the same thing. People actually turned up on time because they had to. And let's talk about letters. We used to write actual letters on real paper. There was something so special about it. You sit down with your nice paper, I decorate it, make illustrations, you know, do the address, put a stamp on it and go up to the post box. And then you just wait, wouldn't you? Like days, maybe a week, maybe months for a response. And getting a letter felt so precious. And some of my friends would write 10, 12 pages and I still have them and I absolutely love them. I mean, and also the information landscape was so different back then. We just couldn't Google anything. You had to carry around maps. You had to kind of pre-plan things. If you didn't know it, you didn't know it. One thing that my sister said, and it really reminded me, she said that she loved nothing more than going to the travel agents like Lum Polly and getting all the holiday brochures and just browsing through them and circling all the holidays she wanted to go to. I remember there was just not much information to go on, so you had to do your research. And as she put it, it was all a bit of a mystery until you arrived there. You just had to hope for the best. And that brings me to teletext, which a few of my friends booked holidays off. So I really laughed when I read this comment. I booked holidays off teletext, but I always worried the hotel would be rubble by the time I got there. And a lot of people said that teletext actually taught them patience. And this comment, I once waited 12 minutes for the teletext dating page to scroll back round. That was my first toxic relationship. And that's it, isn't it? There is something uniquely 90s about just being bored and daydreaming. And someone described it as the freedom to be bored with no ability and therefore no pressure to constantly be connected to anyone. And to quote Madonna, life was a mystery. We didn't know too much about people like we do nowadays and all the parasocial relationships through social media. And there was this comment, which I know for a lot of you might stress you out as you're now parents, but someone said, my parents had no clue what after school clubs I did. I took myself everywhere. I used to go out with friends from 13 and get up to lots. Being unreachable wasn't just about logistics. It went much deeper than that. It was about freedom, real freedom, the freedom to have and make mistakes without them being documented and to feel present, which brings me to number one, what we most miss from the 90s. And here it is. This is it. I think the thing that people most miss is going out, real friendships and being present. And someone wrote, getting ready to go out could be more exciting than actually going out. It would start at 6 o'clock. We'd spend ages choosing outfits, doing makeup, helping each other with hair, always with some great tunes on. And I really understand that. But for me, the main event was the dancing. And I just felt like you really were living in the moment with your friends. And someone said the dancing was the workout. I killed so many calories in the club. And look, there was no cameras. Not back then, really, unless you bought a disposable. And if you could be bothered to develop the film, the photos, half the time you had red eyes or my eyes were closed and they'd be really blurry. And I think this comment really nails it. A life that's not recorded, the ability to make mistakes and not have them follow you online for the rest of your life. And then when we were stupid and childish, there wasn't the risk of ruining our entire lives because some dipshit recorded it and it went viral. And there was this comment on Reddit. I miss knocking on doors to see if my friends were home and then getting knocks, not knowing who it might be. Let's be honest, face-to-face was the default. I think someone described it perfectly with this comment. Being present, laughing until your stomach hurt, and making memories that weren't for content but for life. I think that's brilliant. And it even felt like dating was different. Someone wrote, we didn't do that much dating as such. It was more getting drunk, snogging and or shagging someone, and it went from there. But for me, the crushes, they lasted weeks, months, even years. I mean, you could build an entire fantasy off a single glance in the corridor from that guy in sixth form with the floppy River Phoenix hair. It was pure euphoria. Of course, we didn't have the texting, which feels, I think, an exhausting part of dating. And I think someone really explains this well. Now there's so much angst about texting. He doesn't text enough. He doesn't text first. He doesn't reply quickly enough. Should I text him? And another person said, teen dating in the 90s was all logistics and waiting. You had to ask someone out face to face, coordinate with landlines, walk home hopeful. But here's what I'm not telling you. And we know there was a dark side to the 90s, especially for girls. Yes, we had girl power and ladette culture. We thought we'd arrived. We thought we were on an equal footing. But the reality, I mean, there was this era of casual sexism, even outright misogyny. And I think it was just treated as part of life. When I was 15 at my work, a man started calling me jailbait, all the time. And he kept asking me to bunk off school and that he's going to take me shopping. And then there was other older men. They would always be like, oh, do you want to come to the nightclub? And they try and get you a bit drunk. And this is before I even knew about drinks getting spiked. But someone wrote, being a teenage girl in the 90s was wild. Men in their 20s and 30s acted like 15-year-old girls with fair game. It was seen as normal. And there was this comment, casual sexism being excused because the men were being ironic, see Loaded magazine, etc. And let's talk about school bullying. I mean, I wasn't bullied badly at school. I know some people had it much worse. But I was bullied relentlessly for, weirdly, when you look back at it now, being flat-chested. Do you remember that line in Degrassi Junior High where they said, you're so flat, you made the walls jealous? They used to shout that at me. And so, oh God, look, even now I'm feeling a little bit... it hurts me still. It's weird, isn't it? It's really weird. And so this comment hit hard. Verbal harassment and abuse was considered not a problem. Teachers were aware and did nothing. This included remarks about teenage girls' bodies that would be considered sexual harassment now. The advice given to victims was just to ignore them or don't let it get to you. And that was it. I do feel in the 90s. Just, put up with it, ignore it. And then was this comment. Boys could assault us. Grabbing, slapping, pulling bras until they broke, and the response was, shake it off. Or, what else did you expect, looking or acting like that? And also there was that thing where you were called either frigid or a slag, and there wasn't much in between. I think this person really summarises it well. It was a pretty misogynistic pretty intolerant time, quite unpleasant if you were a woman or an ethnic minority or not heterosexual. And I do think the 90s was this contradiction that we lived inside. You know, it was sexy, thrilling, full of possibility. And yet, if you just scratched beneath the surface, there was that darkness. And yet, and I suppose this is the uncomfortable, inconvenient truth, even knowing all this and looking back at it all, I still have this ache, this sense that something has been lost. As someone on Reddit wrote, I have vivid memories of the mid-90s and of being 13 to 17. I remember how I looked, the clothes, how I walked, how I thought, the naughtiness and the excitement, that amazing group of friends, the laughing, the dancing, how anything seemed possible. It feels like a dream. So how can we recreate this feeling from the 90s? Well, I think you're going to like this comment. I've decided to live more like it's the 90s. I listen to 90s music, wear my old 90s clothes, leave my phone at home unless it's vital. I'm just going to end it on this comment because I absolutely loved it. The 90s was the pinnacle of human life. It's all been downhill since then. Christopher Pike, Sweet Valley High, Point Horror, and a bag of pick and mix from Woolies. Social life, not social media. So that is my love letter to the 90s. And I could have covered so much more, but Sarah, I wanted to get your thoughts. Why does nostalgia hit us so hard?
Well, you know, nostalgia is such a powerful emotion, and it's actually a really distinct one. And I just want to read this comment that outlines it. Nostalgia is actually a bittersweet feeling. It can make you feel both happy and sad. And interestingly, when it was first observed, which was in the late 17th century, it was originally seen as more something like homesickness. And weirdly, it was believed to happen only to Swiss people. And they thought that it was possibly caused by the sound of constant cowbells in the Alps.
Oh, that's actually really sweet, really lovely.
It is sweet. But obviously now when we talk about nostalgia, we think of a more general longing for the past. We also think of it as this spontaneous emotion. But recent research now suggests that it's often triggered by a variety of very specific feelings, such as loneliness, sadness, meaninglessness, boredom, and even disillusionment. And David Webb, on his All About Psychology Substack, said, when our present feels lacking, our mind reaches for the past. And he goes on to describe it as an emotional immune system deploying positive memories to fight off feelings of loneliness or sadness. And as much as it's about the past, it can actually be a tool for the future. So it can even increase optimism and inspiration and even motivation to pursue important life goals. But, and here's what's really important, is it depends on the context and on the person's current mood. So one study found that if you're already feeling lonely, then nostalgia can actually make it worse. I think that's what they're talking about in this quote by Dante's Inferno. There's no greater sorrow than to recall a happy time when miserable.
I do understand that, especially when you feel like as you get older or adulthood, you feel like life is a grind and full of duty and responsibilities, or that feeling of like, what is there to now look forward to? You know, when you're younger, you're always looking forward, right? And then you get to the midpoint and you're like, am I just looking back?
Yeah. So, I mean, it can definitely hit differently depending on how you're feeling at the time. And also, for people who are quite anxious, it can make things worse rather than better. Because what they end up doing is comparing this romanticized, carefree past with the present, which is constantly anxious if they're an anxious person. And that's going to just be even more so if you're looking back to a time when you were a child and you had no responsibilities, and then comparing it to being an adult. Because as you said, the daily adult life does involve responsibilities. It does involve grind. It does involve, you know, all sorts of things we don't want to do. And as this comment shows, I love those times when we thought life was so easy, so simple and fun. But as time passes, we eventually grow older. And someone else said, songs released around when I was 16 make me long for the past. I was so free and able to do what I wanted.
Absolutely.
And it actually seems to be getting more pronounced with the latest generation, so Gen Z. And this is actually being driven by the fact that they're a social media generation and they can't get away from a 24-hour news cycle. And there's a lot of nostalgia content being very specifically marketed to Gen Z on all the different social media channels, basically to sell stuff to them, as it usually is. But they're primed for it because they're in that phase of life, moving from childhood into adulthood. So it's a really poignant time. And Marius Pon also summed up on Medium, Gen Z are marked by a unique convergence of crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis, both of which have deeply impacted their ability to envision a hopeful future. Nostalgia has become a coping mechanism, a way to find comfort and stability in a world that seems increasingly uncertain. And on top of that, a lot of the nostalgia content that's being used is of these idealized times that this generation hasn't even lived through. And so some people are calling this faux-stalgia. And I have to admit that I can really relate to that because I sometimes feel that I'm nostalgic for the 1930s or the 1940s, and obviously I wasn't born then. And I think a big reason for that is because I had a much older father who was born in the 20s. I grew up around a lot of old stuff and all of his childhood stories, and obviously the movies. I loved Golden Hollywood. So there's a weird feeling that I almost grew up in that time, even though I didn't. And, you know, how about you, Lisa? Because as much as you love the 90s, I can see you also wanting to live in a sort of Bram Stoker's Victorian Dracula era, or even in Bronte country. Do you think that you could have nostalgia as well?
Kind of. But as I've mentioned probably too many times, I love dancing. So I don't know how much you could get down to a harpsichord, you know?
No, you'd just be doing some Bridgerton sort of waltzing. That's it.
I would. Yeah, exactly. So I think that would be the deal breaker for me.
Fair enough. But going back to the psychology of nostalgia, I think what I also find really fascinating is just how memory can play tricks on us. So there was this comment that said, our memories portray a false reality. We too often remember the good whilst forgetting the pains, and the good is depicted as better than it actually was. We're left in a state of melancholy, believing that the past was always more enjoyable than the present moment. And this is actually backed up by research. So there was this one study that was titled, wait for it, Blinded by Wistfulness.
Gosh, that is such a good title.
I know, I feel like maybe this researcher should have been an author. But it actually talked about 3 ways that nostalgia can change the way we think. So, number 1, we actually view nostalgic things more positively. So, for example, this comment shows, of course we always see the past through rose-coloured lenses. If given the opportunity, would we experience the same event the same way as we did before? Or would it be completely different the second time around? And the second effect that nostalgia has is that we believe that things we're nostalgic about are more important than they might really be. So David Webb summed this up by saying, that old TV show isn't just entertaining, it feels significant and central to who we are. And the third effect is our nostalgic opinions are less balanced and usually biased in one direction or another. So, for example, when we go back to our favourite childhood shows, we're not able to see the negative elements that we might see and judge if we were watching it for the first time. So, for example, Lisa, and I know this is going to be a really tough question for you. If Madonna released Erotica now and you didn't already know her, you weren't a big fan, do you think you'd still love it?
Oh, that is a really tough question because that album is so intertwined in those formative years for me in the early 90s. If I heard it now, I think the thing is, and you'll probably know this, you would skip so many tracks that I didn't find that interesting. So I wouldn't enjoy the whole experience and the whole album and how it's meant to be. I would just go to say Deeper and Deeper and Erotica. I just play those songs on repeat. Yeah. Listening to it in my 40s, I'm sort of like, yeah, been there, done that, got the T-shirt.
Yeah,
no.
Doesn't land the same.
So likewise for you, I know you love Buffy. Yeah, so you got the Buffy reboot, potentially.
A lot of the stuff that's been rebooted now or continued now, I mean, I did really love the original Sex and the City, but I haven't even wanted to see the reboot. So it's because it doesn't hit in that time. It's not of that zeitgeist. Yeah. So I totally agree with what you're saying. But interestingly, I came across a song the other day, only a few years late. It was released in 2018 and it was called 1999 and it's by Charlie XCX and Troye Sivan. And I'm just going to read some of the lyrics. So it's, I just want to go back to 1999, take a ride to my old neighborhood. I just want to go back, sing Hit Me Baby one more time.
Hold on, were they even born in the 90s? Do they know the 90s?
Well, they were born in the 90s, but I don't know how much of the 90s they remember. So it's crazy to me that they're like a part of this revival when I just think, well, you were 5. What do you remember? But I think this comment that I found sums up why the 90s were so important. And the person said, I mean, I'm sorry, but 90s kids had the best childhood ever. We were born in a perfect moment to live the old school things. And at the same time, we were the first generation that really used the internet and social media and all that new stuff that came in at the beginning of the noughties. But something that I think is also really important for why the 90s nostalgia is so big at the moment is something that's called the nostalgia pendulum. And it's this idea that there's a 30-year cycle where consumers come of age and then start shaping the culture themselves. So Patrick Metzger, he wrote a book called The Nostalgia Pendulum, A Rolling 30-Year Cycle of Pop Culture Trends. And he said, after about 30 years, you've got a real market of people with disposable income who are nostalgic for their childhoods. So artists working in popular mediums are rewarded for making art that appeals to this audience. So actually, a 2014 study found that consumers are much more likely to spend money on brands that evoke a feeling of nostalgia. So it really makes me think of when we were looking at the emergence of the 45-year-old plus women's market in an episode we did earlier in this season. But I do think there's definitely an element of jumping on certain trends just to make money. And Asset Bank wrote in their blog, however warm and fuzzy nostalgia may feel, there's almost always some cold, hard data crunching behind it.
I mean, you're absolutely right. You do see this cycle where the industry is selling back to us our own memories. There's huge money to be made in it. And it absolutely makes sense that we're buying it because we're longing to feel that way again. But here's the thing. We all know, unfortunately, we can't go back. But I love that quote that I gave earlier where I said we can bring some of the 90s into our lives now. You know, the idea of being present, making time for friends. Let's get unplugged. We had that once and we can recreate it again, or aspects of it. And I really love that. Okay, so if you did enjoy today's episode, please share it with someone else who you think might be nostalgic for the 90s.
And also, if you want to support the podcast as independent podcasters, we would absolutely love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. And let us know what you think. We love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. And I think this is the end of the road. And I can't I can't afford the commercial music. Sorry, guys. Bye for now.